Welcome back to Portrait of an Editor. I am Francis Lombard. Some housekeeping. The past 50 or so episodes are now on YouTube for free. When you get there, please like and subscribe. It helps a lot in the motivation department. Thanks. A reminder, there is a Portrait of an Editor Patreon page where you can find all the older interviews, so check that out for just $1 a month. I will do my best to get part 3 of my conversation with Stephanie Phillips and Will Dennis to you for next week. But we're taking a break from that right now. As promised, here is my conversation with Chris Thompson about the heavy metal relaunch. Chris is one of the 3 editor masterminds behind the rebirth of heavy metal. You should be able to find the new issue right now. It's on newsstands throughout the world. Chris and I talk about that and how they managed to pull that off towards the end of the interview. And if you're a heavy metal fan, you should rush out and get it right now. It's a great looking magazine. Enjoy. Hi, Chris, and welcome back to Portrait of an Editor. This is a welcome back because as we were talking just before we started recording, you were one of my earlier guests back in 2017. So I guess if the folks listening, you can go back and find it. It's on the Patreon page. I've been trying to make sure everything's available. So our earlier interview, as you were at Titan, and we were not really talking about editorial. I think we spent a great deal of time. I mean, this is 2018, so a lot's gone on since then. So for all of us in so many different ways. And here we still are, made it through. Congratulations on making it through everything that we've had in all these years. But we were talking more about the role of marketing and editing. And I think that's where we were. What do you have to add? Do you remember, is your brain beginning to fire again regarding all those years ago?
Yeah. I remember that well. There's obviously a crossover between editorial and marketing. And I think I was explaining part of that crossover is, marketing isn't just being handed something terrible and told to try and promote it. It's like helping to produce something good that then it's easier to market, because if you're on the marketing side, the publicity side, if you've been able to have some sort of input to make sure it's good, then I would always say my job is not to polish a turd. It's to make sure you don't create a turd in the first place. And that was really the thing of, if I could help with bringing in the right creators that are more marketable, that have an audience, that have a following, if I can help improve the story in such a way that it's an easier sell, then that was very much something I felt at Titan. And to be honest, that's not changed all that much. And certainly my feeling and approach about that has not changed so much, because I can give a little rundown of the how we got to this point in a moment. But I'm now at heavy metal, where we're doing the relaunch, and my story is kind of the flip version of that, where I am coming at it from very much the editorial. I'm brought in to be one of the trinity of editors that are shepherding this relaunch, bringing in new stuff. But now I'm just helping to kind of consult and give a little inspiration on the PR and publicity side. So I've just literally flipped my role, and which one is the dominant one in this case.
So the evolution, let's run through that, how you ended up becoming the editorial manager for heavy metal.
Yeah, if I remember right, and I would say this works with the timeline, I'd just joined Titan. I'd been running my own podcast, Pop Culture Hound, for too many years at that point, and I'd come out of comics retail, went into Titan as their senior brand manager, and then I was one of the group, actually the team, that was overseeing the launch of Static Press, which was the dedicated European imprint of stuff at Titan.
Yeah.
And actually, this will play into what's happened with heavy metal, so we'll get to that. And so I had a great time at Titan. And in 2019, after having launched Static Press and you and I having spoken around that time in 2018, I was essentially poached or headhunted by a recruitment company in the UK who were looking for a brand manager for Eagle Moss, who are more of a collectibles company. But given my background in licensing, publicity, etc., they wanted me and it was a good offer, and so I made the jump. And the interesting thing was some of my friends were still at Titan, and I got the most incredible compliment I've maybe ever received, after the fact from Titan, where I was gone and they didn't know that people still spoke to me. But one of the people, the heads of the company, said, Chris was the best editor we ever had, who we never actually, gave the title of editor.
Okay.
And it was
Congratulations.
100% accurate, but it was very nice. It was very generous. And so I spent my time with Eagle Moss between 2019 and the beginning of 2022, essentially got through the pandemic, did some great stuff with them. And I just felt it was time to do something new. And I'd had a couple of people who were wanting to launch comics projects start to talk to me and say, hey, could you do something with us on the side to consult with us, to help us to launch this, to get it right? And I had enough of them that I thought, do you know what, this is the time to make a jump and do something different if I'm going to do it. And so that led me to becoming a freelancer, which I've been now for the last three, going on a little bit longer than 3 years now. And I've had the opportunity to work with some incredible people and companies. And I spent a bit of time working with Opus Comics, who very weirdly had been a sort of offshoot of the previous iteration of heavy metal, which had really sort of fractured and splintered in so many ways. And working with Opus was fantastic. And during my time there, I was still making my regular trips to the Angoulême Comics Festival at the beginning of each year. And I met a guy called Dave Kelly there, who had been doing his own comics under Tales of the Night Watchman, had some stuff published with Image, was kind of shepherding his own projects. And he was really interested in the status of heavy metal, which at that point had disappeared. So he was trying to pick my brain in terms of what I knew from the Opus side, what other pieces of the puzzle I could give him. And so Dave and I just kept talking about this. We were really jazzed about, is there a way for heavy metal to return? And so while we were trying to figure out if this was an option, there ended up being stuff happening behind the scenes with the original company. New sort of owners and players came in to acquire the brand. And because of Dave's connection of talking to them and seeking out what could be done, it ended up that he and I were recruited to be part of the editorial trinity alongside Frank Forte to bring the magazine back.
Yeah,
And,
because
and so it was an interesting path.
in 2022 at New York Comic Con, and I'm just rethinking, is that heavy metal had a number of panels talking about the relaunch, and as they were issue 300 had come and gone, and they were about to relaunch with a number one. They had a lot of great plans. They were going to be partnering up with another group. Was that Opus? I guess
Yes.
that or somebody
Well, no.
else.
So Opus had sort of come out of heavy metal, and if anything, was going to be an imprint at one point, as was Magma, which is
Yeah. Yep.
Denton Tinton's company. So it's all very interconnected.
Hmm.
Um, quite interesting. I don't want to say incestuous; it's the wrong way of putting it, but certainly there's a lot of crossed wires. And there was a point in time where Whatnot, the
Whatnot.
sort of online company, yeah, they were looking at essentially taking over the license for heavy metal as a magazine and producing their own. And that came very close to fruition, but it never happened. And so what we're now doing is very much the owners of the brand as it stands now. We're sort of relaunching. It's a brand new company, and we've got fresh material. We're coming in with a brand new number one.
Hmm.
And the one little carryover is that there was the Massive Entertainment who were working with, or Massive Publishing were working with Whatnot on the sort of license version that almost happened. And because of all the shenanigans with distribution that have been going on, for us to get into Luna quickly, we had to do it via Massive on this particular issue. And so it happens that Massive are offering a heavy metal #1 variant of their own, which features one of the covers that would have been on the Whatnot issue had that all gone down as they'd originally hoped.
Around 300, there was this explosion with Magma, Opus. Just it was
Yes.
monthly. There was this whole thing, and then it all collapsed. And about
Yes.
distribution, payments to creators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yes.
I was amazed by the number on Kickstarter. You had
Yeah.
Metal Hurlant and Heavy Metal, which hopefully I do not confuse on our conversation today. Both launched Kickstarter at the same time, and now I'm looking at the final numbers for Heavy Metal. And you guys got like what, $780,000. It's like
Yep.
that's what I'm looking like. So almost $1 million, and then Heavy Metal Hurlant pretty much matched that pretty closely.
Yes.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
where the hell have these people been all this time? Like all these fans. I know.
I know.
I love it because I'm a huge fan of anthologies, and I became a adult comic book reader because of Epic Magazine, Heavy Metal, Metal Hurlant. I'm an old man and I'm still reading comics, and it's because of
Yeah.
what these guys introduced, the Europeans, and what the influence they had on America. I'm amazed by the support, and I guess you guys are too. And congratulations on that support. What does that say to you regarding everything that you had to get through to get this issue to the printers?
We had a lot to overcome. For a
Mhm,
start, as you sort of identified, the industry really had kind of gone against anthologies in the years prior.
mhm.
We were sort of told, and even from my years in retail, I would say to people anthologies were a non-starter. And whenever I would speak to current retailers, we were still getting the same narrative. So that was one hurdle to come up against. The other thing is that without dwelling too much on the past, because that's something we don't want to do, but there is the thing where we had to earn our reputation back because really the reputation of heavy metal had been so tinged by the specter of non-payment, of treating creators badly. Again, mostly because they weren't being paid, of damaging relationships with foreign publishers through non-payment. And so that was something we had to overcome. And so although this is a new company, we've been trying to honor those commitments that have fallen, by the wayside because we are still heavy metal. We're still claiming that name. And so there were companies like Glenr that I think quite publicly was still owed money. So we've made sure that that's been made good. We've been fixing things up with creators so that we can offer things from Glenr, from these different creators, and we have these good relationships going forward. The other thing, just to come back to the idea of anthologies, I think what you're seeing now is a change in the marketplace because it was very coincidental, the timing of us and Metal Hurlant finally, after many decades, wanting to push into the US market. And that was super interesting how that went down. I don't want to rub it in too much, but I think we did end up finishing on a higher
Yes, you
amount.
did.
And we actually, I think if you look at the numbers, we're about double or more of the number of backers they had because they were selling a subscription rather than pushing for a launch. And, I'm very proud that as we're recording this, we're essentially a few days away from our first issue heading to retail. So I think we're also going to be first out with that. So even though we started our Kickstarter just after, we then sort of maybe slightly eclipsed their numbers, and then we're getting out first, and I'm very proud of that. But it's in a marketplace where you've got things like Oni doing great stuff with the EC brand and bringing back anthologies. You've got the constant drumbeat of 2000 AD that's really kept that flame going all this time. I think it's a golden age for anthologies again. I think people want the opportunity to consume and get a taste of more for their dollar.
I mean, just how did you react to the outpouring when you launched your Kickstarter? I mean, were you taken aback by it? Did you expect that?
None of us could have predicted the extent to which it went, for sure. I mean, I've always felt, heavy metal for me goes back to being 10, 11 years old, and my friend saying to me, "Do you want to come around my house to read Heavy Metal magazine and listen to Pink Floyd?" And that was how I found, Philippe Douillet, Enki Bilal, all these people that I adore. So I think there's so many people like me with a sentimental attachment to heavy metal that have a historical connection, but they've just not felt that the material being presented was the kind of thing they wanted to read for a long time. And so I don't want to say that it wasn't good per se. It just wasn't suited to a lot of the people who had maybe grown up with this and had an idea of what heavy metal could and should be. And so for us, we really went back to our original inspiration of what made heavy metal great. How do we do that again? How do we recapture some of that former glory? And that was the approach. So I was optimistic that people like me would be on board and would come back for this, but the sheer volume and the level to which they did, I couldn't have anticipated. But I was optimistic that there was definitely people that felt like I did and felt like we did.
Now, the backers you have, seeing that heavy metal does definitely have some nostalgia aspect to it, and
Mm.
um, what is the audience like? Can you tell at all from the Kickstarter what your back the makeup of your backers of is this providing information to you that you're like, oh, this is something the timing's right for this. Not You're not just playing on nostalgia, but you're playing on the audience that's looking for something different.
Yeah, I mean, very much from it in a very broad sense, we're kind of getting an idea of both. There was a lot of lapsed readers coming back, a lot of people who loved, its original European roots. I think what you find in heavy metal over the last 10, 20 years, the sort of previous iteration, it had become very American. And that's not a bad thing, but there's already so many American comic book companies offering, competing, and differing things. And really, the offering of European comics, the American market, has never been huge, and heavy metal was at the forefront of that. So, having kind of given up that unique point that they had, we were trying to come back to that. So, a lot of it was about licensing some of the best European content that still hasn't appeared in English language, finding that next wave of European creators who have that spark like the original guys when they were being presented to the US and English language audiences for the first time. It was about that. The other thing is that there's a huge nostalgia amongst kind of younger readers. So, millennials and Gen Z who didn't grow up on heavy metal, but heavy metal has this cachet and this awareness that transcends generations. They've
Mhm.
just never experienced it at this level. And so there's an interesting thing just it seems in all markets where there's a nostalgia for the things they missed in these younger generations. So by us providing this return to the roots, this perfect jumping on point, we've found there's a balance between people who grew up on this, Gen X and boomers, and then kind of Gen Z and millennials who are nostalgic for this thing that they never saw, and they feel like this is the perfect jumping on point to experience. And I agree, this is the combination of those generations. It's like something that I hope hopefully everyone can draw something from.
Generations even now today are seeing the influence of heavy metal in other aspects of pop culture. I mean, it just
Absolutely.
never, you constantly, an interview or whatever you hear about metal hurlant or heavy metal influenced me, especially when you're talking about the genre stuff of science fiction, horror, and everything. And even
E
exactly.
Exactly. And all the filmmakers are referencing it, whether it's Ridley Scott or Zack Snyder, they're talking about what heavy metal meant to them and how it introduced them to certain things. So even the way there's been the renaissance of film and amongst the younger audiences, there is that same thing of like, "Oh, okay, this influenced those guys. I need to see that stuff."
Because heavy metal has a very, its connection is very French, but
Mm,
Europe's a, there's a lot of other comics being done. Any trip to
exactly.
Angola, and you can tell, there's Europeans everywhere making comics. Are you guys? I mean, is there stuff beyond just the French connection? that's going that you plan
Yeah.
on bringing in? I've only had a chance to really glance through the issue one, and my eyes are just like, wow, to tell you, thank you for sending
Good,
me that.
good.
And I'm waiting for my subscription. I can't wait to have it in my hands. And but where are you going? Are you taking this opportunity to open up the world?
Yeah, I mean, if I can speak sort of more directly to my stuff. So as I was mentioning, there's three of us. I like to refer to us as the Trinity of editors, and we each had to come up with a different name for ourselves. And in some ways, that kind of mean nothing. It's
Okay.
like executive editor, editorial manager, whatever it is. There's the three of us on there, and then what you see within the strips is there'll be an individual editor credit on each, so you can really see whose different tastes were coming into play, what they brought to the table, things like that. So if I speak about my particular entries, because I'm quite proud of them and they're quite different. So one of the big ones, going back to my years at Titan, was when we did Static Press, we had the Enki Bilal library. And at that point in 2018, Enki had just released the first volume of, his current magnum opus, Bug,
Hmm.
which I've been told is going to be 6 volumes in total. There's 4 currently out, and the fifth is almost ready for release. And at the point, I sort of knew it was going to be a multi-volume book, and I kept pushing at Titan to be like, I really want to, adapt Bug for the English language. I want to bring this to audiences, and I could just never get it across the line. So in 2019, when I left there, I felt like I had something unfinished. And when the opportunity came up to do something with heavy metal, and considering Enki's great history with the magazine, going back to Exterminator 17, which is what I first saw, I was like, can we go and get the license for Bug? And so that was my very first thing to go out and get. They had to double check that Titan didn't want it, and still after all these years they didn't, and so it was perfect. And so Bug is the first book of Bug is going to be serialized across the first year of heavy metal, starting in issue 1. So we wanted to have that legacy creator that was really there from the earliest days in the magazine. So he's your now I'm going to get this totally wrong. I want to say he's a Serbian creator originally, but obviously considered very French,
Yeah.
and so we that influence in there. Then I can't remember if we've referenced it on our call yet, or if it was before when we were chatting. But at the end of last year, I moved to Palermo in Sicily. The wonderful island off the boot of Italy, and I moved here in November last year. Went into one of the comic shops here, and they had this beautiful new book of Valentina that was done by an Italian creator. Literally had just been released, was on the new releases shelf, and it was done by a guy called Sergio Gerasi in conjunction with the Crepax estate. And so this is continuing the story of Valentina doing something quite fresh and new, really being very Italian with it, but also, it's universal. And Crepax is something I love, like those beautiful Fantagraphics editions of the Crepax library. I love those things, and seeing this, I knew we were onto something pretty much before anyone. In as much as I know, I don't even think the French have licensed this yet, and if they have, we're certainly going to be bringing it to market first.
Mm.
But I went straight to the publisher, who spoke with the Crepax estate, and so we have Valentina, this brand new book called Valentina è vera, or Valentina is real, which is going to be serialized across the first 4 issues of Heavy Metal as well.
Oh wow. Okay.
So we've kind of got this French, we've got this Italian going on, and then we wanted to bring some new stuff to the table. And so one of the series that I'm editing is called Millstone, which is a dark fantasy, very much with kind of video game elements, taking things like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, but also mixing them with a lot of D&D sort of influence. And that's being written by Michael Conrad, who is now a well-established, US-based writer. He's out of Portland. I've been enjoying his stuff for the last few years. I still consider him a newcomer because in the scope of history, but he's actually been around for a few years,
Mhm.
so he's doing super well, and I managed to get him to agree to come and do something with us. And then the artist on that is Elias Kyriazis, who is a brilliant Greek artist and kind of considered the godfather of Greek comics. And he's not that old at all, but for the Greek industry, it's really younger people coming up and embracing it. And he was the guy that inspired them all and inspired this new wave, which has included people like Mike the Alienus, Danny, etc., and this emerging Greek talent. So yeah, there's a Greek and US connection that comes together on Millstone. So really, we're trying to honor the fact that it was primarily European with a US connection, breaking some new talent, introducing new people, but definitely with that European vibe, because I feel that had become a little lost and a little bit muddled in its story over the years.
I know you just at the beginning of this, you talked about the three editors, the trinity of editors. And one question I always try to get a definition of is the title of editors, because there's so many different titles of editors. You already probably answered the question of that there really isn't. You just have a difference between what Dave Kelly, you, and Frank Forte
Yeah,
are doing.
yeah.
So you're considered an editorial manager, which in my other conversations with editorial managers is very different than what you just described. Is there any difference between the Trinity? Did you, because of the skills that the three of
I
you are bringing?
I would say it's a little bit more of a pecking order, really, than anything.
Okay.
As it turned out, Frank had been brought in first because of his connections to the previous iteration of heavy metal. So, by virtue of coming in first, he was able to have first dibs on going, well, I'll take the title editor in chief.
Yeah.
Um, and then when Dave and I came in, it was at the same time, and Dave really wanted the executive editor title. And I was just like, do you know what? Editorial manager will work for me. My joke was, I'm here to manage the editors, but it's really not that way at all. It really is just three different titles to reflect that we're three different people. But when you look at the individual stories in the magazine, you'll see that on each one there's an individual editor credit. And so I think it's very much you're more able to look at it and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I really dig Frank's vibe. He's into this, or I dig Dave's vibe. And we do have a very different sort of approach amongst us. Like, for example, my version of heavy metal is fully inspired by the magazine. I'm, obsessed with Dwie, Mobius, Bilal, Liberatore, etc. That's what got me into the mag. And then, there was the heavy metal animated film, which for some people was a huge influence. I never watched that back in the day. It was much later that I actually saw that. So for me, it was never an influence on my view of heavy metal. But then you take Frank, who really loves that animated film. He's worked as a storyboard artist in animation. He's worked on Bob's Burgers. His approach is actually more about like, God, I love that film, and that's heavy metal to him. So the European stuff is not as appealing, but the film is a big inspiration for him. And then Dave neatly falls between us, and I think that's where Dave and I connected, because he loves the European content, he loves that, but he's also got a huge appreciation of the film. So it works really well to connect us as well. We have these different approaches. All of it's heavy metal, but we just have a different aesthetic. And I think you'll get that from the kind of content that we've brought to the magazine. I mean, having said that, we all went back to the European roots. So, for example, Frank was able to bring back one of my personal favorites, which is Vicente Segrella's The Mercenary, into the magazine.
Mhm.
And having that in, I remember I'd got my hands on the only three English language volumes I could ever find, and I love that. It's gorgeous work. It's very simple writing, but you can't beat the painted work of Segrella's there. And he brought back Burton and Sib, And then Dave is looking more at some of your cutting edge talent coming out of Europe. So he found this guy called Janevsky who had worked for a company called Limousidine. And I'm sure when you get a chance to speak to Dave, he'll speak more to this. But that was kind of quite erotic content, and he was able to commission new things from Janevsky and be kind of introducing European creators that are fresh to the US and English language market. So I think that the titles become less important than our personal tastes and what we bring to the magazine. And issue one is a showcase for that, I think.
I mean, that is one thing about heavy metal, the unique voices of every
Mm,
creator just shining, just letting those voices out. And then also editorial
yeah.
obviously has your unique taste, your unique voices,
Mm,
allowing that to flourish. I mean, because that was the thing. And that's the thing going back to anthologies is that, yeah, there's some stories in anthologies I don't like, but it's this possibility of seeing a point of view or a creator's voice or a creator's that you never expected. And it's not tempered by editorial needs or commercial needs. I mean, it's just
exactly.
unleash it basically. And is that sort of the approach? It sounds like
I,
that's what you
I
guys are doing.
I would say so. I think that the great editorial hands, it's why this podcast is great because we get a little focus on us. You get to talk about us. But if we've done our job well, we're not important. And you don't really know about us. You know
Yeah.
about the creators. We've helped them to deliver the best story they possibly can. And then we've just gotten out of the way. We should be unsung heroes. And so I think we've done that well, but we did still, I guess there's a little bit of a not ego. I don't want to say that, but we have pride in what we've contributed. So we actually wanted to put our own little just edited credit on our strips, so you could see what our taste level was. And I think if you're doing an anthology, you want to actually be able to follow and connect with certain people and be like, "Oh, okay, I like when Chris is editing something because he's going to do, I dig what his vibe. I like what he does, or I appreciate what Frank does because it's coming more from a film and animation background, and he gets me. So I'm going to look forward to Frank's entries." And I think that was what we wanted to signpost, but really our job was to get the best stuff we could in and then get out of the way and let it be told. And I'm hoping we've done that with issue we're at this point we're a few days away from release. I can't wait to start reading reviews, to hear back from people, even just you sort of saying, I can't remember how you put it, you were blinded or your eyes were bleeding from the
No, they weren't
incredible.
bleeding. I didn't want to say bleeding because that was sort of negative, but they were just like overloaded. I think I just,
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, do I say my eyes are bleeding?" Like, no, 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 that's not the right term to use. It's just the sensory overload of seeing this artwork and just the pages too. In a way, he's in the whole decompression aspect of comics. The European stuff at times takes a little bit of readjusting, and this is not
Mm,
negative. It's
no,
just
no.
that what I saw in heavy metal is that you're definitely getting your money's worth when it comes to the artwork and everything you're putting in there. And the artwork breathes still. And it just feels with everything that's there, it just breathes so much. And the differences every time as I'm scrolling down these pages last night, just the changes from one genre to
Mm,
another, the changes in styles from one genre to there's some processing. So if anybody who contributed to this Kickstarter who's buying this book, oh, is it worth my very hard earned money? Yes, it is because there's so much to unpack there in a way, which is great. And I think when you talk about the Americanization of heavy metal back then, I rediscovered heavy metal back in like 2020. It did feel like this feels a little American. It doesn't feel like it has the layers that you usually would
yeah.
get in older magazines. And so it was just nice to see this sort of just a wave of art coming at me and all these different
Yeah.
changes up every time there's a page turn. So
Yeah.
you know, I think people
I'm
will be
and
very
I'm
happy
glad.
when they get it.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're getting that vibe. That's the intended thing. And for us, obviously, seeing the finished issue compiled was amazing. And I think subsequent issues are going to impress people even more. It's going to look incredible. One of the things that we've not sort of overly signposted because we brought him on really late in the process, but for those that are familiar with the designer Tom Muller, who has done loads for Marvel, he's currently working on the relaunch of Marvel Knights that Joe Quesada is coming back to oversee. We actually brought him in on the tail end of issue 1 as the art director. So you get a little feeling of his input in issue 1, but I'm kind of hoping that as the issues go on, you'll start to see more in these design elements. He's a Belgian guy, originally lives in the UK, has been designing for American comics, did the sort of X-Men Krakoa era, a whole bunch for Image, really got this great eye, and again, bringing that European sensibility. So I feel like you're just going to see that more and more in the magazine as time progresses.
So is this a bit of to get back some of the marketing when you're talking about the three editors and their taste? In conversations with an editorial about anthologies and how you might be able to sort of find a way of having continuous, one getting readers to come back every month, even though the stories are different, and the talents are different.
Yeah.
Is this a bit of your marketing influence where maybe we can have a personality come up via the editors because those are the one people, the one the names you're going to have on the book that are continuous every from issue to issue? Was that a conversation you had, or just how it just came together?
To be very honest, it is literally a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Like that's one of the things that I've spoken about, but something that Dave and I had owned from the very beginning, in that, we're each known in the industry for different things, but we bring a level of recognition of who we are. And so we wanted to be these public voices and representatives for the brand and the company and the magazine, and certainly bringing our own personal flavor. That's something that Frank was very on board with as well, and something we wanted to do. And I guess along the lines of that, one of the things I was passionate about from both a marketing and kind of mercenary standpoint was the idea that it's not just about the stamp of quality that's going to bring people back. I hope that will. But I was very adamant that it would be good to have ongoing serials where there are stories to come back for. So there are certain stories that will transition in and out, or some are just short stories for an issue. They're one and done. But I wanted to have these ongoing storylines. So Bug, for example, book 1 of that runs across the first 4 issues. My hope, if people respond well, is that we can go straight into book 2. And that's a 6-book series. So that could be the first 6 years of heavy metal as really a backbone that runs through. Then having Valentina, that's a 4-parter, that works very neatly. Millstone, the book I mentioned before, is an ongoing serial that the plan for that is to continue. And the other one that Dave and I are actually co-editing, and it's quite interesting how that came about, is the ongoing adventures of Tana. And so Tana is the big character from the film. So I know Frank had a personal affection and connection to her and wanted to tell a bunch of short stories of Tana by different creators. So he'd already spoken to Joseph Michael Linsner about doing something short with her, which yielded a 6-pager. I was really passionate about building a big world for her and being able to really tell the definitive Tana across, the multiple issues. And so in my head, my perfect people to bring that to life were Leah Moore and John Reppion, the sort of well-known writing partnership. And then Dave had a real passion and sort of, flash of getting Anna Morozova, whose art style is very different for the mag, but could really do something cool with Tana, to bring her in. And so we ended up marrying up these creators, and out of the sort of marriage of these two viewpoints, Dave and I came to co-edit all of which is to come back to this idea that with the mag, we wanted to find a balance between ongoing serials that drew people back, as well as fresh stuff, and our sort of editorial voices and us wanting to promote and talk about the stuff like I'm doing with you now and like we'll do over the coming months. We really wanted to give people various points to connect, whether it's that you like a particular editor's output, whether you like particular creators, whether you follow certain serials, or you're just there for everything European. We wanted to have multiple touchstones, and ideally, maybe you grip onto a whole bunch of them, so you're with us for the whole ride.
Gotcha. So, what is the publishing schedule for heavy metal?
It's a quarterly schedule. So the first issue hits stores April 30. I think as it's turned out again, we've all been the victim of the current, I don't want to say distribution wars, distribution shenanigans, I say. It's
Yeah.
much, lighter, but April 30 is when Diamond gets it into stores, just in time for Free Comic Book Day, which perhaps is not as significant as it was in the past because of those said shenanigans. But this was one of my things where it was the marketing hat on of going like, hey, the best time we can be in stores is for Free Comic Book Day because people are looking for new stuff. Lapsed readers are coming back in. We're really going to be able to make a big impact. And I think our print run in the end was 73,000 copies. And, that is definitely bolstered by hitting the right time at retail when people are open. The retailers are looking for good new stuff that they can hook people with as well. So April 30 from Diamond, then May 7, the following week for Lunar distribution. And the week after that, it'll start hitting newsstands. And what's incredible is it'll hit newsstands internationally. So we're going to hit the US, we're going to hit Canada, we're going to be in the Barnes and Nobles. We're also going to be in Europe on the newsstand and even in Australia, places where we haven't been on the newsstand in the longest possible time. And it's going to be a quarterly magazine. So the next issue will be out late July. Between us and as a slight scoop, we're hoping to have some early copies at San Diego Comic-Con, which would be incredible.
Okay.
Then you'd be looking at the next issue hitting at the end of October in time for Halloween. And then issue 4 would be late January, kind of around when we go to Angoulême again next year.
Gotcha. How do you, I guess we can spend another half hour talking about that, but how the hell do you pull off a magazine distribution on newsstands internationally? Everywhere in the world. You're going to Australia, you're going, okay. I don't know. But I'm just sort of a little tongue-tied here of like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess we can end on this one because I don't know how long it's going to take you, but how do you pull that off? Where did that idea come from? And it just seems like it's just intense. I don't know what to say about that. So
I have to give full credit for that to Frank. So Frank Forte really, he's very old school in his approach to comics. He loves the fact they're on newsstands, and he kind of hates the fact that they're not still there.
Yeah.
And so he was like, how do we get ourselves back on a newsstands? What are the options? And he really researched this. He looked into it. He's like, who do I need to contact in the US? He just reached out everywhere, and was able to get the connections. And I won't go into it too much because there's only so much I can say at my pay grade, and I think only so much that can be said publicly. But the other key to getting back onto newsstands, aside from tenacity, doing your research and looking out there, is to spend some money on getting them out there. That is what kind of rules that industry now. I don't want to say you're buying shelf space, but certainly there's money speaks to your seriousness. And so we were very serious about this. And again, between us and everyone that happens to watch this episode, there is a little bit of a flex of going, well, like, imagine if we could have our magazine back in English language on French newsstands where maybe people walk outside the humanoids offices and they see there is, heavy metal number one with some great content going back to the European roots.
Yeah, married. Just
Yeah, exactly. I'm married, good time. Yeah, and so it really came from that. It was just that desire to be in there, and the fact that we had a team that was so either international in background or international in inspiration. We wanted to make sure it was available as widely as possible, and so we could go anywhere that we are and ideally find a copy.
wow. Okay. Um, I'm gonna go hit some newsstands too and see how that's. I mean, where they're popping. So
I can't wait to see that myself. I mean, I'm actually visiting Australia to go and see my family back there. Wow, I fly tomorrow as we're talking, and I'm kind of hoping that at the end of my trip, I might start to see it popping up on Australian newsstands. And I can't think of anything more exciting, honestly. That will fill me with joy because in Australia, the newsstands are full of Phantom comics, which for
mhm.
those who know, it's almost a bit of a joke. There's an Australian Mad magazine, and then maybe there's going to be heavy metal again. And that's the comics distribution in Australia.
Wait, I thought the Phantom was only big in Scandinavia, and like,
No.
but it's big in Australia too.
Yeah. So everything you've heard about the sort of Scandi influence and legacy of the Phantom, it all applies to Australia. There's a publisher there who's been doing it for, I want to say, on somewhere on 80 years now. And those they and the Scandinavian publishers actually share content between themselves. So you'll find Australian produced content in the Scandi mags, and then vice versa. It's a beautiful relationship that no one in the rest of the world understands at all. It's like,
No.
why is this happening?
I know. It's just an odd thing. So, is there anything as we wrap this up? Is there anything that you would like the audience, to know about heavy metal that we haven't had a chance to cover? That
Yeah, I think I just want to encourage people to give it a go. You're looking at, I think we came out at around 232 pages for issue one, and we're going to be sitting at over 200 pages per issue. I think the longest story in there is 20 pages, which is like, what you would get in a typical US comic, but you've got varied length stories. So we have a couple of like just one pager short strips. We have, a few sort of 8 pages, 16 pages. There's a 20 pager. Valentina is 18 pages. When you break that down over 232 pages, there's so much content in there. There's so much good stuff to read. There really is something for everybody. But I think as well, you will find more than what you expect to appreciate. I'd love people to go in with an open mind because we were just about bringing together the best possible comics we could. There's 3 distinct viewpoints and approaches and tastes in there, but definitely with commonalities. So I feel like at the very least, you're going to like 2/3 of the material in there, and I hope you kind of appreciate everything. It's really you don't get that level of bang for your buck anymore, and it's that size of magazine. I mean, it's very rare that I'll sit and read a graphic novel in one sitting these days. I will do it over 2 or 3 nights. And this is a magazine that you could do the same thing with and really digest, soak in, and appreciate. And I think beyond what we're doing in the magazine, we're looking at what else we can bring to the publishing line as a whole. So this is really the relaunch of Heavy Metal magazine and the launch of Heavy Metal as a little bit more of a publisher to bring other things to people. So at this stage, I can't say too much to you, and I'd love to follow up with you sooner than we did this time because there's something very cool that I'm working on that will be completely different again, and will showcase another sort of aspect. But we're bringing a lot, and this is the point to jump on. And we really want these to be evergreen. We want it to be that you are chasing to get that heavy metal number one, and then you're coming back for number 2, for number 3, etc. I'm super excited about it, and yeah, I hope that comes across.
oh yeah,
I will say I will say that apologies if I'm in any way deflated. So my fellow editor Dave and I have just come off our first big convention appearance as heavy metal, which was here in Palermo where I live. So the Expo Comics and Games here, they gave us a giant booth to promote heavy metal. We did a panel. We've been looking at portfolios endlessly for 4 days. So we're really quite roasted at the end of all of this. But despite all that, I'm so excited to have the chance to talk about what we're doing, and no one could be happier than I am about it hitting stores on Wednesday. I can't wait to see it everywhere I possibly can. I'm giddy.
Well, congratulations on the relaunch, and it if it's anything like what you started with the backers and the numbers and just everybody sort of paying attention to heavy metal once again. I mean, I would think that, come April 30th and for the month of May, you're going to have a busy month ahead of you. And I don't think anybody's going to be disappointed with this. I wasn't. I was just, like I said, overloaded by it. So it's a little bit of a look backwards, but it's also a huge look forward. So I can't wait to, I'm going to sit down and read the PDF, but I am also looking forward to having it on my lap, especially because it looks great. I mean, just the printed page and the size and everything. So congratulations on that. I'm looking forward to issue 2 and just everything else you guys are doing.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for having me back again. It's great to just chat. We always enjoy having a good conversation, and certainly, I'm excited to talk about this endlessly. So I appreciate the opportunity again.